Hello, this is Christina from The Voice of London. Today we're going to talk about the national lockdown starting on the 5th of November and possibly finishing on the 2nd of December. Instead of repeating the already known facts and restrictions related to it, we'll focus on people's well-being during this tough month. We'll discuss practical philosophical ways of staying above our fears. This way, we aim at providing a fresher and more positive perspective on the measures taken by the government. Our guest is Nicholas de Mattos, a philosophy tutor at the School of Philosophy and Economic Sciences in London. He is also a classics teacher at the St. James School, where he teaches Latin and Greek. Nicholas studied BA Classics and Classical Archaeology at King's College London. Nicholas, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What are your thoughts on the second lockdown? Is it any better than the first one?
Well, I think that my take on it really is that Epictetus's take. Epictetus was a philosopher who had started off as a slave of one of the members of the court in Rome, and he studied philosophy. Justinian, the emperor, eventually threw all the philosophers out of Rome, and he started up his own school in Greece. And his view was that you can't change, you can't help things that are out of your control. You can't help them happening. You can't control the weather. But what you can control are your attitudes to it, how you meet those things within yourself, and that you can control. A quote of his that I remember was, "So you must be put to death, but why go screaming to your death?" A bit extreme, but it's that kind of mindset really which might help.
And what part of this occurrence is a moral lesson? What fate and what coincidence? Do you think everything happens for a reason?
Well, I'm sure that everything happens for a reason. We may not know what those reasons are, and very often it's a bit of a subtle thing. Often in the ancient world, bad things that happened were thought to have been as a result of the sins of men. But it might be even more subtle than that. Whatever, the way that we meet them and the way that we take ourselves through these things with dignity will basically determine a quick and easy end to these things, and things will get better.
How does this period of introspection affect people's mental health?
Well, if you think about the bad things, if your glass is half empty, then continually brooding on the bad things or on your thoughts will just, it's a bit of a catch-22. You won't get out of that kind of maelstrom. Whereas if you can see your thoughts, if you can see the things that are going through your mind, then you are automatically at a distance from them. There is space between you and the things that you can see, and that way you can rise up. It's possible to rise above them.
As far as we know, schools and universities will remain open. How do your pupils feel about going to school during the lockdown?
Well, they're very happy about it, actually. Children are very much motivated by their friends and by their social circles. So, in fact, I had to supervise some pupils during the last lockdown, and they just craved each other's company. So they're quite happy to be at school, and as a teacher, I'm afraid I'm quite happy to be back as well, because it's quite hard teaching online. So I think they're all right.
Great. What do you think is the greatest advantage of being in a lockdown?
Well, even though we're curtailed in some ways, nevertheless, you cut down travel time, and I found that actually suddenly there was more time to do things. Time to do things which you might not have had time to do before. I'm currently writing a book. I got more done towards this book in the last 6 months than I have for the last 6 years.
Wow, when do you plan to get it published?
Oh, well, that depends on whether I can get a publisher, actually. But actually, it's not publishers nowadays; it's literary agents. So that's another story, really.
Yeah, we'll have another interview for that. Can you give people advice on how to benefit most from this stay-at-home period?
Well, there was a very good little exercise that we were taken through recently, a philosophical exercise, and it went a bit like this. So think of who your person who has given you unconditional love, your best friend, and the wisest person the wisest person you can think of, and think what they would tell you to live your life happily and truly. What might they say? So that's the wisest person you can think of, your best friend, and the person who has given you unconditional love. What would they say? And I found that when I asked myself that question, all sorts of things, ideas occurred, which gave me some ideas with which to use the lockdown, the extra time for. So you might want to try that.
Definitely, I will try it. During the previous lockdown, we had time to immerse in the rediscovery of our thoughts and values. This is a useful practice as long as it doesn't transform to overthinking and anxiety. As we're about to face another lockdown, how can we free our minds from the endless worries?
Well, we just recently, in philosophy, we've been talking about the difference between being and becoming. This is a Platonic question. What is that which always becomes and never is? And what is that which always is and never becomes? That's a quote. And so when there's worry, just consider whether you are in a state of becoming, which is where your feelings and emotions and impressions and thoughts change, and what is that within you which is completely indifferent to that, or completely still, which just exists. And I tried that recently, and I found that in fact we were taking our little granddaughter for a walk, and so this was at the start of the day, and she was not in a very good mood. She was grizzly and grumpy, and then I thought, well, what is? Am I being? Do I simply exist, or am I this worried person who is trying to figure out how this day is going to pan out? And actually, it was possible to let the worry go and just to be in the moment, in the present. And that's the thing. Connect with the senses, be in the present, and you find that actually, just in that moment, your worries are not there. They are, you can observe them.
In your view, should the Latins who are alive, what would they say about the currently imposed measures?
Well, of course, the ancients were used to plagues and diseases. For 6 years, Athens was besieged by Sparta, and for each one of those 6 years, because they were all cramped up in the city, and they weren't allowed out, there was a plague, and many people died of that. But the point was, they just considered it a fact of life, and they just got on with things. Obviously, they took precautions, but that's how they dealt with it. It was just a fact of life, and they just got on with things. And I think that's how the Greeks and Romans would have dealt with things like this.
I think we can learn a lot from them. And yes. Our last question: if you were given God's powers, what is the first thing you would do to benefit humanity in 2020?
I think that I would enable every human being to see what life is like in the shoes of the person opposite, so that in a way they could see things from the other's point of view. Not necessarily that they should become like the other person, but that there should be a kind of sort of an empathy switch, that every person should be able to empathize with their neighbor. And I don't think you would see any of the sort of division and intolerance that we see today.
Thank you so much for this interview.
It's a pleasure, Christina.